Sundays used to be my favorite day of the week. At 69, routine is comfort, and comfort was something I clung to after my husband, Thomas, passed away 6 years ago. My house in Cedar Hollow had always been the gathering place. Big oak table, warm kitchen light, cinnamon and rosemary floating through the air. That afternoon was no different. I had prepared roast chicken, honey carrots, and Claire's favorite lemon pie. My daughter arrived late, like she usually did, her husband Daniel stepping out of their SUV first, as if he owned the driveway. Claire followed behind him with my grandchildren, Lily and Mason. I noticed immediately how carefully she moved, how her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to occupy less space. A mother recognizes these things, even when she wishes she didn't. Daniel greeted me with his usual tight smile. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," he said. Never Mom. Always Eleanor. A small detail, but over 22 years of marriage, I had learned that small details often reveal the truth. Claire avoided my eyes while helping Lily hang her jacket. Mason barely spoke. He used to run into my arms when he was little. Now he stayed close to his father, quiet, alert. I tried to brush away the unease and focus on setting the table. Families go through phases, I told myself. Teenagers grow distant. Marriages change people. But something felt heavier than usual that afternoon, like the air itself was holding its breath. We sat down to eat, and the conversation felt staged. Daniel spoke for everyone, telling stories from his office, interrupting Lily when she tried to describe a school project. Claire laughed at his jokes a little too quickly, her voice thin. When I asked Mason about soccer, Daniel answered instead, explaining how discipline builds character. I caught Claire flinching at the word discipline. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I always see what others miss. Halfway through dessert, I noticed Lily pushing her pie around her plate. "Sweetheart, don't you like it?" I asked gently. Before she could answer, Daniel set his fork down harder than necessary. "She's fine," he said. "She just doesn't need sugar every time we visit." His tone wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the room. The moment that changed everything came when Claire reached for the water pitcher. Her sleeve slid up slightly, revealing a dark bruise blooming across her forearm, deep purple fading to sickly yellow at the edges. Time slowed. The sound of the clock on the wall grew louder in my ears. "Claire," I said quietly, "what happened to your arm?" She froze. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. I saw fear there. Not embarrassment, fear. She pulled her sleeve down immediately. "I bumped into the pantry door," she said too quickly. Daniel chuckled. "She's always been clumsy." Something inside my chest tightened so violently it felt like a physical tear. 22 years of small incidents, canceled visits, unexplained injuries, withdrawn children, lined up like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to solve. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that doesn't look like an accident." The temperature in the room dropped. Lily stared at her plate. Mason's hands clenched into fists. Claire suddenly stood up. "Stop, Mom," she snapped, louder than I had heard her speak in years. "Please stop interfering. You're always looking for something wrong. You're going to ruin everything." Her words hit me like a slap, but it wasn't anger I heard. It was panic. Daniel rose slowly from his chair, calm and composed. "Maybe it's time," he said smoothly, "for you to accept that your involvement isn't helpful anymore." He told the kids to wait in the car. They obeyed instantly. Trained. That's the only word that came to mind. After they left, I stood alone in my dining room, staring at half-eaten plates and untouched pie. The house that had felt warm an hour earlier now felt cavernous and cold. I went upstairs without fully deciding to. My body just moved. In my guest bedroom closet, behind old blankets, I found something Claire had left months earlier when she helped me reorganize, an envelope I hadn't opened because I was afraid of what it might contain. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Claire standing in our old bathroom mirror, bruises on her ribs, a split lip, a cast on her wrist. Each photo dated carefully in the corner, year after year. My breath caught in my throat as realization washed over me like ice water. She had documented everything. She hadn't been clumsy. She had been surviving. That night, as I sat on the edge of my bed with the photos spread out around me, my phone buzzed. It was Lily. Just 3 words. "Grandma, please help." My heart stopped. In that moment, fear transformed into something else, something sharper, stronger. Determination. I had spent years staying quiet because I didn't want to lose access to my grandchildren. I had convinced myself that keeping peace was the same as protecting them. I understood now how wrong I had been. Silence does not protect anyone. Silence protects the person causing harm. I wiped my tears, picked up my phone, and made a decision that would fracture my family and expose truths no one in Cedar Hollow wanted to face. If my daughter couldn't speak yet, I would speak for her. If my grandchildren were afraid, I would stand between them and that fear. Whatever it cost me, friends, reputation, comfort, I would not look away again. I didn't sleep after Lily's message. The words replayed in my mind until they stopped looking like text and started feeling like a warning siren. By morning, I had called the only person I trusted with something this serious, my longtime friend Patricia Hale, who had worked 25 years in family advocacy before retiring. She arrived before noon, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her expression already telling me she understood the weight in my voice from the phone call. I showed her the photographs Claire had hidden. She didn't gasp or dramatize. She simply studied each one carefully, then looked at me and said, "This has been going on a long time." Hearing someone else confirm what I already knew made my stomach turn. It meant I wasn't imagining it. It meant the nightmare was real. We were still sitting at the kitchen table when my phone rang. Claire's name lit up the screen. Her voice was low and strained, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. "Mom, about Sunday?"
"I'm sorry."
Daniel was just stressed. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Patricia had warned me. Pressure would only push her back into silence. Instead, I said gently, "Claire, I found the envelope." There was a long pause. So long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her breathing shift, uneven. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. I told her Lily had messaged me. Another silence. This one heavier. "He checks our phones," she said finally. "If he finds out she contacted you." Her voice trailed off. Fear lived inside that unfinished sentence. Before I could respond, she hung up. The rest of the day passed like a storm building on the horizon, dark clouds gathering but not yet breaking. Around 8 that evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Lily stood there alone, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red and wide. The street behind her was empty. "Grandma," she said, and her voice cracked, "can I stay here tonight?" I didn't ask questions at the door. I pulled her inside and locked it immediately. Her hands were shaking as she explained she was supposed to be at a friend's house studying. Instead, she ran. "Dad smashed Mom's phone," she said, each word tumbling over the next. "He said nobody was going to poison us against him." She reached into her bag and pulled out her own phone. I recorded it. We sat together on the couch as she pressed play. The video was chaotic, shaky, filmed from behind a partially closed bedroom door. Daniel's voice filled the room, loud, furious, unrecognizable from the controlled tone he used in public. He was shouting at Claire, accusing her of betrayal. I saw him slam his hand against the wall inches from her face. Mason stood in the corner, frozen, eyes wide. Claire didn't fight back. She just stood there absorbing it, shrinking into herself. My entire body felt cold. Patricia, who had stayed after Claire's call, watched without speaking. When the video ended, she exhaled slowly. "This is serious," she said. "We can't wait." Lily panicked when we mentioned calling the police. "He said if we ever told anyone, he'd make sure we'd never see Mom again," she whispered. That threat explained years of silence. Control doesn't only live in fists. It lives in fear of losing what you love most. While Patricia stepped into the hallway to make discreet calls to former colleagues, I stayed with Lily, holding her as she trembled. Every passing minute felt like borrowed time. I kept imagining Daniel realizing she wasn't where she claimed to be. I kept seeing headlights turning into my driveway. The call came sooner than I expected. An unknown number flashed across my phone. It was Claire, using a neighbor's device. She sounded breathless. "He's looking for Lily," she said. "He's been drinking. He's blaming me." I could hear something in the background, a door slamming, muffled shouting. "Where's Mason?" I asked. "With me. We're locked in the bathroom." That was the moment hesitation disappeared. Patricia motioned urgently. She had already contacted emergency services through someone she trusted. I gave them the address. Claire whispered, "I'm scared," and I hadn't heard that tone since she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "Stay on the line," I told her. "You're not alone anymore." The next hour unfolded in fragments. Sirens. Patricia speaking in calm, clipped sentences. Lily pacing near the window despite my attempts to keep her seated. My own heart beating so loudly it felt audible. Finally, Patricia's phone rang. She listened, nodded, and then turned to us. "They have him," she said. "Officers are there. Claire and Mason are safe." Lily collapsed against me, sobbing into my sweater. Relief and rage mixed together in a way I can't fully describe. Relief that they were alive. Rage that it had taken this long. When Claire arrived at my house later that night, she looked smaller somehow, like pieces of her had been chipped away over the years. Mason clung to her side, refusing to let go of her hand. The moment she saw Lily safe on my couch, she broke. The composure she'd held together for decades shattered in seconds. She cried the way a person cries when they realize they've survived something they were certain would destroy them. I held her the way I used to when she scraped her knees at 6 years old. Except this time, the wounds were invisible and far deeper. Police officers took statements in my living room under the soft yellow lamp that had once lit birthday parties and holiday dinners. Lily showed them the video. Claire described years of threats, intimidation, control over finances, isolation from friends. Mason spoke quietly, but clearly about nights he pretended to sleep so his father wouldn't notice him shaking. Listening to my grandson recount fear as if it were routine nearly broke me again. An emergency protective order was requested that very night. Things that had lived in whispers were now written in official reports. Long after the officers left, the house felt different. Not peaceful, just quiet in a new way. Claire sat at my kitchen table staring at her hands. "I thought I could handle it," she said. "I kept thinking if I just stayed calm, if I didn't provoke him," her voice trailed off. "That sentence is the cage so many women live inside." I reached across the table and squeezed her fingers. "You survived it," I said softly. "And now you don't have to survive alone." She nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. That night, my home became something it had never officially been before, a refuge. The spare bedrooms filled quickly. Lily insisted on sleeping with the light on. Mason refused to close the door completely. Claire lay awake in the room across the hall, and I could hear the faint rhythm of her restless pacing. I sat in the living room until nearly dawn, not because anyone asked me to, but because I felt the need to stand guard. For years, I had told myself I couldn't interfere, that it wasn't my place, that maintaining contact was more important than confrontation. I understood now that silence had been his greatest ally. When the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I made coffee for 4 instead of 1. It wasn't the life I had planned at 69. I hadn't imagined police reports on my dining table or court hearings in my future. But as I looked around at my daughter and grandchildren eating toast in cautious quiet, I felt something steady growing inside me. Not fear, not doubt, resolve. Daniel had controlled the narrative for decades. He had shaped how the world saw him. But that control had cracked the moment Lily pressed record. The truth was no longer locked behind bedroom doors. And whatever storm was coming next, legal battles, community gossip, fractured relationships, I was ready to face it. The protective order was granted within 48 hours, but legal papers cannot silence gossip. News travels fast in a town like Brookmere, especially when it involves a man who built half the commercial properties on Main Street and sponsored the local baseball team every summer. By the end of the week, everyone knew Daniel had been removed from his home. What they didn't know was why, and he made sure to fill that silence before we could. He called friends, business partners, even members of our church, presenting himself as the devastated husband blindsided by false accusations from an unstable mother-in-law who had always resented him. He didn't need to shout to control a room. He knew exactly which strings to pull: reputation, sympathy, doubt. And people listened. The first sign came at the grocery store. I felt it before I saw it, the subtle shift in the air when conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Caldwell, who had borrowed sugar from me for 15 years, suddenly found the cereal aisle fascinating. 2 women I had served alongside at charity luncheons stood whispering near the produce section, their eyes flicking toward me and then away. By the time I reached the checkout, the cashier, who had once asked about my grandchildren every week, avoided eye contact altogether. I left the store with shaking hands, not from shame, but from fury. Daniel wasn't just fighting in court. He was fighting in public, and he was doing it skillfully. Claire noticed it too. One afternoon she returned from picking up mail, with her jaw clenched. "Someone left a note in the box," she said quietly, handing it to me. It read, "Destroying families isn't justice.
No signature. No explanation.
Just judgment." Lily pretended she hadn't seen it, but I caught her staring at the paper like it might bite. Mason withdrew further, burying himself in headphones and books. They had already lived years under one man's intimidation. Now they were facing the quiet cruelty of a community choosing comfort over truth. I realized then that abuse doesn't end when the abuser leaves the house. Sometimes it changes shape and spreads. The real fracture came from within our own family. My younger sister, Margaret, and always practical, always cautious, called me late one evening. "Are you sure about this?" she asked without greeting. Daniel came by my house. He looked devastated. He said Claire's been struggling mentally for years. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "He showed you bruises?" I asked. "He showed you the video?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He hadn't needed evidence. He had planted doubt, and doubt grows quickly when it protects your idea of someone you thought you knew. "You're risking tearing this family apart," she added gently. Maybe this could have been handled privately. I hung up after telling her one thing. It was handled privately for 22 years. That's the problem. Church became its own battlefield. Daniel had rarely attended services before, but suddenly he was there every Sunday, sitting front row, shoulders heavy, eyes lowered. He spoke to the pastor after services, voice trembling just enough to seem authentic. I heard later that he described himself as a man praying for reconciliation. Meanwhile, Claire and the children stayed home. The first Sunday I went alone. The sanctuary felt colder than winter air. People hugged me out of habit, but stepped back quickly. One woman suggested I pray for humility. Another implied grief from losing Thomas had clouded my judgment. I realized then that people would rather believe a polished lie than face an ugly truth. Truth demands action. Lies allow comfort. The children felt it at school. Word travels even faster among teenagers. Lily overheard someone say she was exaggerating for attention. Mason was shoved in the hallway and told to fix your crazy family. Claire tried to transfer them to another district, but Daniel contested it legally, arguing that stability required them to remain where they were. Stability. The irony was suffocating. Each evening we gathered around my kitchen table like survivors on a small island, sharing small victories, a completed homework assignment, a therapy breakthrough, a day without nightmares. Our world had shrunk, but within its borders something unexpected was happening. The tension that once lived in Claire's shoulders began to ease. Lily started speaking in full sentences again. Mason asked if we could plant tomatoes in the backyard come spring. Healing doesn't roar. It whispers. The court hearing for the extended restraining order arrived in late autumn. The courthouse in Brookmere isn't large, but that morning it felt monumental. Daniel arrived in a tailored suit, calm and composed, greeting people in the hallway as though attending a fundraiser rather than defending himself against abuse allegations. His attorney spoke first, framing the situation as a family misunderstanding exaggerated by an over-involved mother. I felt every eye in the room flick toward me. I kept my posture straight. When our lawyer presented the video, the courtroom air shifted. Daniel's voice echoed from the speakers. The shouting, the threats, the walls struck inches from Claire's head. There is something about recorded rage that cannot be polished. Claire testified next. Her voice trembled at first, but with each sentence it grew steadier. She described isolation, friends she slowly stopped seeing, accounts she no longer had access to, rules about when she could leave the house. She described fear becoming routine. Lily spoke about sleeping lightly so she could hear arguments begin. Mason, barely above a whisper, described counting seconds between footsteps in the hallway at night. Watching my grandchildren recount strategies for surviving their father's moods nearly broke whatever remained inside me. Daniel maintained composure until the judge asked about the documented injuries spanning nearly a decade. She's clumsy, he said, repeating the same line he had used at my dinner table. Something about hearing it in that sterile courtroom made it sound absurd. Then something happened I hadn't anticipated. From the back row, my sister Margaret stood. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She requested permission to speak. She told the court about a Christmas 2 years prior when she had walked into the kitchen and seen Daniel grip Claire's wrist so tightly it left marks. She admitted she had said nothing out of fear of being wrong, fear of conflict. But I was wrong to stay silent, she said, voice cracking. Daniel's composure shattered for the first time. He half rose, anger flashing across his face before he caught himself. It was a brief crack in the mask, but it was enough. The judge granted the extended restraining order that afternoon. Daniel was ordered to have no direct contact. Supervised visitation was to be reviewed pending further investigation. Outside the courthouse, cold wind cut across the steps, but for the first time in months I felt warmth in my chest. Not triumph, just relief. Claire stood taller beside me. Lily squeezed my hand. Mason looked up at the sky like he hadn't noticed its color in years. The town would continue whispering. Reputations don't collapse overnight. But the law had spoken clearly. That evening, back at my house, the silence felt different than it had months ago. Not heavy, steady. Claire made tea while the children worked on homework at the table. I watched them and understood something that had taken me nearly 7 decades to learn. Isolation is painful, but it is survivable when you are aligned with truth. Community approval can disappear overnight. Invitations can stop. Friends can fade. But integrity remains. Daniel had built his image carefully for decades, and it would take time for that image to erode publicly. Yet inside our small circle, the illusion was already gone. I stepped onto the porch before bed, the autumn air sharp against my skin. The town lights flickered quietly in the distance, unchanged on the surface. But beneath that surface, something irreversible had occurred. The silence that once protected Daniel had fractured. People might doubt. They might resist. But doubt cannot erase evidence, and resistance cannot rewrite reality. I realized then that breaking silence is only the first battle. The second is enduring the backlash. And as I stood there listening to the wind move through the trees, I knew we were ready for it. Winter passed slower than any season I can remember. Court dates, attorney meetings, therapy appointments, paperwork stacked on my dining table where holiday centerpieces once stood. But somewhere between the legal language and the long evenings, life began to shift in quiet, almost invisible ways. Daniel violated the restraining order twice, once through indirect messages sent with a mutual acquaintance, and once by parking across the street from Lily's school. Both incidents were documented. Both strengthened our case. The man who once controlled every room with calm precision was unraveling under the weight of losing that control. Meanwhile, inside my home, something steadier was forming. Claire stopped flinching at every passing car. Lily started sleeping through the night. Mason laughed, a full, unguarded laugh, during a board game one evening, and the sound startled all of us because we hadn't heard it in so long. The divorce proceedings stretched into early spring. Daniel's legal team attempted every possible strategy, questioning Claire's memory, implying exaggeration, suggesting emotional instability. They requested psychological evaluations, financial audits, mediation sessions. It was exhausting, designed to wear her down. But Claire surprised even herself. Each time she sat in that courtroom, she grew more certain of her own voice. Trauma had once silenced her. Now documentation empowered her. Bank statements revealed financial control. Medical records supported patterns of injury. Lily's recorded video remained irrefutable. And perhaps most powerful of all was Daniel's own behavior. The impatience, the flashes of temper when rulings didn't favor him. Masks can slip under pressure, and judges notice. Outside the courtroom, the town slowly recalibrated. Rumors don't vanish, they evolve. When Daniel's business partner quietly distanced himself, people began asking why. When church leadership privately acknowledged concerns about his conduct, whispers shifted tone. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was doubt in the other direction. Margaret and, who had once questioned me, started attending therapy sessions with Claire as support. She admitted how easy it had been to believe the polished version of a man who donated to charities and shook hands confidently. I didn't want to think I'd missed something so big, she told me one afternoon while we folded laundry. That sentence lingered with me. Denial protects more than the abuser. It protects everyone who doesn't want their world disrupted. The children change the most. Healing in young people is both fragile and remarkable. Lily joined the debate club at school, her voice gaining strength with every argument she constructed. She told me once that speaking up in public made her feel like she was reclaiming something that had been stolen. Mason, always quieter, found refuge in science. He built a small greenhouse in my backyard as a school project, tending seedlings with the kind of patience that comes from wanting something gentle to survive. Their progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, nights when raised voices on television made them freeze, mornings when court reminders triggered anxiety. But there were also milestones. Lily inviting a friend over without fear of what might happen, Mason sleeping with his bedroom door closed for the first time in years. Claire surprised me most of all. The woman who once moved carefully through rooms as if afraid of taking up space began standing straighter. She enrolled in a certification program for community outreach work, something she had once abandoned because Daniel claimed it was unnecessary. She started volunteering at a local women's resource center, speaking quietly to others who were still trapped in cycles of silence. The first time she shared part of her story publicly, her hands trembled, but her voice did not break. Watching her step into rooms, not as a victim, but as a survivor, shifted something deep inside me. I had spent years worrying I had failed to protect her. Now I realize protection doesn't always look like prevention. Sometimes it looks like standing beside someone as they rebuild. The final custody ruling came in late May. The judge granted Claire primary custody with strictly supervised visitation for Daniel, contingent upon anger management completion and psychological evaluation compliance. It was not absolute severance, but it was protection layered with accountability. When the gavel fell, I felt decades of tension release from my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Claire closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, as though breathing freely for the first time in 22 years. Lily hugged her tightly. Mason slipped his hand into mine. The battle had been long and bruising, but it had not been in vain. Back home that evening, we planted tulips in the front yard. It wasn't symbolic on purpose at first, it just felt necessary to put something living into the ground. As we pressed bulbs into soil, Claire laughed at Mason's insistence on precise spacing. Lily argued about color coordination. The air carried the scent of damp earth and approaching summer. I watched them from a slight distance, noticing how different their movements were now. No one flinched at sudden sounds. No one scanned the horizon for threat. Safety had begun to feel normal rather than temporary. The town, too, continued its quiet shift. A few neighbors approached with hesitant apologies. Others never did. That was fine. I had stopped measuring our worth by community approval. Reputation can be rebuilt. Integrity must be preserved. Daniel's business declined steadily as more stories surfaced from former employees who had experienced similar volatility. Patterns reveal themselves when one person dares to speak. Silence isolates. Truth connects. One evening near the end of spring, Claire and I sat on the porch watching fireflies scatter across the yard. The children's laughter drifted from inside where they were finishing homework. "I used to think staying quiet was protecting them," she said softly. "I thought if I absorbed it, they wouldn't have to." I squeezed her hand. "You were surviving," I told her. "But survival isn't the same as living." She nodded, eyes reflecting porch light. I'm starting to understand that. Looking back now, I see how easily silence embeds itself into families. It disguises itself as patience, loyalty, privacy. It convinces you that endurance equals strength. But silence does not rebuild what fear destroys. Speaking does. Acting does. Risking reputation, comfort, relationships, sometimes that is the cost of protecting what truly matters. We lost friends. We lost invitations. We lost the illusion of a perfect family image. But we gained something far more durable: honesty, safety, and the chance to heal without pretending. As summer approached, the tulips bloomed exactly as Lily had predicted: bright, unapologetic color against the soft green lawn. Mason adjusted the greenhouse vents with careful precision. Claire received a part-time position at the outreach center, helping other women document their experiences before they became emergencies. And I, at 70, discovered that courage does not fade with age. It sharpens when guided by love. If I have learned anything through all of this, it is that silence may delay conflict, but it always strengthens the wrong person. The moment we chose to speak, truly speak, everything fractured. But in that fracture, light entered. And light, once allowed in, refuses to leave.